welcome to the Queer Divorce Club. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Tara. I'm excited.
I'm looking forward to talking with you about some of the legal aspects of divorce and mediation. And I know you can't, give us all legal advice. You want to talk about that, but you can give us some information that we might need as we go through the process.
Sure, absolutely. Anything I can do to help.
Okay. To start us off, can you give us a quick background of your connection to queer divorce and what you're hoping to share with the listeners today?
Sure, absolutely. I am not a queer person, but intimately familiar with queer divorce. Some of your listeners or viewers might have seen Mormon No More, which is a Hulu docuseries about my ex-wife becoming aware that she is a lesbian and leaving the Mormon church and meeting another lesbian former Mormon and falling in love and starting a family. And so I became aware that she was a lesbian shortly before we separated. She let me know, and ever since then, we started the divorce proceedings, have become divorced, and now we are co-parents, her and I and her new wife, Sal. And I was a practicing attorney at the time, and becoming a single dad 50% of the time forced me to change my practice around, and now I do divorce mediation.
All right. So can you explain a little bit of the basics of how divorce mediation works and how it might be different than going through the full process with attorneys or not with attorneys, or how the different processes might work?
Yeah, absolutely. First, though, I have to do the legal disclaimer, like all attorneys do. So the information provided on this podcast is for informational and educational purposes and not intended to be legal advice for anybody. When I do divorce mediation, I'm not sitting in the position of attorney. Mediation is not legal practice. And so therefore, nothing I say in terms of mediation is meant to provide legal advice. If you need legal advice, please reach out to an attorney who's licensed in your jurisdiction. That being said, divorce mediation is a process that allows you and your spouse to work together with a neutral third party called a mediator to reach an agreement in the terms of your divorce. The mediator is not a judge or an attorney. They don't have the power to make decisions for you. They don't have, most mediators don't even give advice. I come at it from a slightly different approach where if the couple can't make their own decisions, I provide alternatives for them. But none of it is legal advice. None of it is binding. So mediation is different from going to court in several different ways. First, it's less adversarial. It's not about winning. It's about coming to an agreement. In court, you have a winner and a loser. The mediator is essentially powerless, and where the judge holds all the power. Mediation is also completely confidential in most cases. In my contracts, before we start mediating, I state that neither party is allowed to call me to the stand or anything like that. So anything said in a mediation session is completely confidential, where in a court, everything is recorded and is often publicly accessible. Second, mediation is usually much faster and less expensive. In court, it can take months or even years. Mediation, my quickest cases, it's been over in 2 or 3 months. Longest cases, several months, but those are when there's more disputes, and it is a little more adversarial in some cases. You're not waiting for a judge to make a decision. You're working directly with your spouse to reach an agreement. And third, I think mediation is ideal for people who need to maintain their relationship after their divorce. Especially if you have kids or if you have businesses together or so on. The focus is, like I said, it's not on winning and losing like it is in court. It's about creating a solution that works for both of you. Usually, instead of both people being happy, you're never going to reach an agreement in a divorce that makes both people happy. You're going to reach an agreement that both parties can live with, and that's sort of the goal.
Yeah, kind of like if you're, especially if you have kids, I'm just thinking about that as an example is you're going to have to co-parent. So whether you parallel parent or co-parent, mediation could maybe give you practice on figuring out what you need for the kids and how to go through all of that logistically.
Exactly.
Do you have cases? So you mentioned mediation is confidential, but that means so somebody could go through mediation and still potentially go through the court process if that's necessary based on one of the spouses filing, needing to go through the trial process or maybe not reaching agreement. Is that correct?
Right. So mediation can fail. It's not without risk.
Okay.
So, for example, if you can't resolve a custody issue, or you can't resolve the property distribution or support orders and that sort of thing, sometimes you can just have so much animosity between the couple. So recently I had clients where we started doing a Zoom mediation, and that devolved into so much vitriol that now we have to do separate sessions for each of them.
Yeah.
Process. So I talk to party one, get
Mhm.
all their information, get what they propose, go talk to party two, and go back and forth and so on. That's not ideal for mediation. The best mediation works when the three of you can be in a room together and have civil discourse and go, okay, you get the kids on Tuesdays through Wednesdays, we get the kids on the week, or whatever the case may be. But in cases where there's so much anger and hurt, and face it, divorce is hard, especially after a long marriage. There's a reason why people get divorced.
Right.
It's not because the relationship's going great. And so there's a lot. I allow anger, I allow yelling and crying in my sessions, but then we take a minute and we try to forgive each other and forgive ourselves for those things, and then get back on track.
So I'm just trying to think about the process too on the other end. So if it's too adversarial and you can't resolve and it fails, it could go to court. On the other end, say you're going through the process amicably. Oh my gosh, amicably. I can't say that word. How do you say that
Friendly.
word?
I love that.
Friendly. That's a good way. That's a good way to say it. Oh my goodness. So if you're friendly in the divorce, you can technically do the paperwork all on your own, but mediation could be a step beyond that to help you figure out what all the details of everything you might have to figure out in the
Yeah.
process, right?
So even when I was divorced, being an attorney, I didn't want to handle it myself. I thought I could, and we set out that way. But after months and months of me dragging my feet, realized that it would be best to go through a mediator. Lena's my ex. Lena and I have probably the best ex-husband, ex-wife relationship you could possibly have. However, you know, you're not always thinking clearly in divorce. Divorce is traumatic for most people who go through it. It certainly was for me. And so I wasn't at my best decision making. And there's so much that goes into it. Your divorce order needs to cover everything. It needs to cover all the marital property, all the individual property, every issue related to kids. And you can't leave ambiguity in there, or else it's going to be rejected by the courts. And so you might have the best understanding with your ex, but is that understanding going to last 15 years, depending on how young your kids are? Is that understand, if your ex is entitled to a portion of your pension, you're going to be paying this person the rest of your life. And so, you need to have everything laid out in there. And a mediator or an attorney knows what to do. They have lists of things. They've done it many times before. And so, you got to have all the details taken care of, all the T's crossed, all the I's dotted, stuff you wouldn't think about, like the difference between fall break and spring break and who gets what time, or one of the things that I always put in my divorces, unless the parents don't want it, is each parent is entitled to 2 uninterrupted weeks in the summer. And most people think like, oh yeah, that's common sense. Each parent should get a summer vacation with their kids. But, we also think about, okay, on odd years, mom gets to choose, on even years, dad gets to choose, or in queer divorces, mom one gets to choose, mom two gets to choose, for example. And if you don't think about those things, those times conflict. And when do you have to have those decisions made? Well, if you don't make those decisions by May and you're starting to think, well, I want 2 weeks in August, there's plans, there's school, there's camps, there's all these things, extracurriculars that get involved. So if you plan it out and you sort of know the path of parenting for the next 15, 20 years, who's going to pay for college, that sort of stuff. This all goes in the divorce. Who needs life insurance? Who doesn't need life insurance? Those aren't things that maybe the layperson is going to think of on their own. But if, somebody dies or one of the kids gets into trouble or you get remarried, and things start to look different, all these things can cause a lot of problems, even in the best relationships. But if you've got the plan on paper and you both agree to it, you can say, well, we've agreed to this situation. Let's use this as our baseline and then negotiate from there.
Right. So your job as a mediator is then to make sure we're thinking of all of those scenarios like that into the future that you can anticipate.
It's not just resolving today's conflict, it's resolving the conflict for the next 20 years, really.
Right. And it can be hard in the moment when you're going through that trauma to think, like you're saying, it's really hard to think about what's going to happen 10 years from now, or maybe things are going really well. And then my ex marries somebody that I don't really like, or that throws a wrench. And, there's all these things that could happen down the road that can make it more difficult.
And one of the mantras we have in sessions is divorce changes everything. So you spend 15 years married to someone, you make a lot of plans and you have a lot of expectations for your life. Well, as soon as you guys decide to get divorced, all those get crumpled up and put in the garbage. So if you were planning on that van life retirement, that's not going to happen, after divorce. You're going to, first of all, the earning partner, if there's a stay-at-home parent and an earning parent, the earning parent now has to pay for two households for a number of years. And so financially, it can be devastating. For the unearning parent, well, they just lost all their security. And, so that, you have spousal support and child support, which are two separate things, and some are negotiable, depending on the state you're in, some are not as negotiable, and so on.
Yeah, I think that's important to also remember. You just said as the state you're in, and maybe we'll get into some of that and some of these other questions, but excuse me, each state has different rules around divorce, right? So it's important to make sure you're working with somebody who understands your state's rules.
Yeah, so divorce is almost as old as marriage. Marriage is about 3,000 years old, or excuse me, about 5,000 years old, started about 3,000 BC. And divorce, the first codified divorce we have is 1760 BC in the Hammurabi Code. So, within 1,500 years, which I guess is a short time for humanity when most people didn't read, I mean, that they needed to come up with rules. And those rules are to protect, usually, in traditional cases, it's the wife, but it's the unearning party, the party who stays home with the kids. What are they entitled to? And states and the Supreme Court have, flipped it. It used to be just the dad paid, but now that we have, post-industrial revolution, you have women making more money than men sometimes. Now we have queer families that are recognized by law. And so, that's kind of turned upside its head. So we look at who is the support, the financially supporting partner, the nurturing partner. We don't have a lot of laws for where that's 50-50 yet, but I think that's probably, in the next 20 years of divorce law, we're going to see more recognition of that.
Yeah, so it's all shifting, and really queer divorce is the youngest of all those, right? Because queer marriage is the youngest of all of those, and wasn't federally legal in the US until 2013. So now that we're in this opportunity for LGBTQIA plus individuals to get divorced, what are some things that they need to keep in mind, and where should they start if they're thinking about getting divorced?
So first, make sure you're safe and healthy. Divorce is super hard, and I think that the first thing I would say is look for support, not just financial support. That's not as big as moral support. So thankfully, in 2017, the Supreme Court I want to say it's Pavel, I think is the name of the case. And the Supreme Court basically said all the straight law rules apply to queer divorces, to LGBT. Sorry if I mixed up the nomenclature.
No, that's okay.
But
Okay.
in cases, with adopted kids, sperm donors, or artificial insemination, these different situations, the rule should apply across the board. So if marriage is if marriage is equal, then divorce should be equal. Now, we're at a time in our country where there are states that are fighting against equality in their rules. I hope that doesn't apply a ton to the divorce cases, but you might have some activist judges who ignore the Supreme Court. We've seen that recently. And hopefully that's less often the case, because this can have some real consequences for individuals. But divorce between members on the LGBT spectrum, since 2017, they've had the same rights as straight parents. So while divorce is hard for everyone, and no matter what sort of relationship you're leaving, sorry, I'm getting sidetracked by statistics because this is really interesting.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the statistics.
But we don't have a ton of data coming out of this. So we only have 10 years
right.
since Ogre befell, and only 5 years since Pavel.
Yeah.
So what's kind of neat is the queer divorce rate is lower than straight divorce rate. But that makes sense. So we've only had 10 years.
Right.
It might be the same, let's look 20 years from now and see what it is. But, lesbians is a little higher than for gay males. But again, all this data is really new. And so, sorry to get back to you, ask your question again, because I get distracted by this. So, when you should have the same rights to your kids, right?
Yeah.
If they're adopted or from a donor, it's going to be based on the relationship that you had pre-divorce. Although, again, what activist judges do, and it's also important to remember that most of the states, while all states observe no fault divorce, most of the states still have fault divorces. And so, in mediation, you're always going to work from a no fault standpoint, and you're going to work from a 50-50 standpoint. You're going to go into the relationship, the mediation relationship, or with the no fault 50-50 mindset. If mediation fails and it goes to the judge, then it goes in default situations. So, for example, if you happen to be a straight woman or in a straight marriage, and you like in my case, the wife comes out as lesbian and you get divorced because of that. If you're in one of these states that has fault divorce, which also happen to be the more conservative states,
right.
The more liberal states have the no fault as the only rule. Like California, for example, where I live, all divorces are no fault divorces. So it doesn't matter if you're cheating, whatever, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And where that comes in is custody and support. And so if it's your fault that the divorce happened, you could get less alimony and or child support and or less custody.
Okay.
So that's where you really have to worry. So
okay, I'm gonna go back to a couple of the things you said to clarify a little bit. So I'm hearing you on that most states after 2017, the federal laws are all like, whether it's a heterosexual marriage or a queer marriage or queer divorce, the laws should be the same across the board. However, there's some states where two things could happen. Either a specific judge could potentially rule, a different way based on the type of marriage it was, correct? Or and you could be potentially considered at fault if you were the one that came out as queer and left the relationship. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So, and it was Pavel, not Pavel. I'm sorry for missing the letter though. So, is the case. So since 2017, what's known as the paternity presumption states that laws that have traditionally applied to a man who is married to the mother of a child during the mother is presumed to be the child's father, unless you can prove that they're not the child's father. So they applied that to adoption and sperm donor cases. So that means that the adoption by married same-sex couples is now legal in all 50 states. It also means that the wives and mothers who have a child during the marriage through assisted reproduction are considered the child's other parent. So if you're the non-birth giving mother, you're still considered the child's parent.
Okay.
That has evolved in most states to mean, so it was applied, the Supreme Court applied it to adoption, and most states have applied that to assisted reproduction as well. So I guess that, where the difference between, gay men almost always have to adopt their baby,
right.
or at least one of the parties does. Women haven't necessarily done that because where lesbian partners have gotten together, one gets pregnant and the other stands in as the mother. Now the Supreme Court saying if they're married, that woman who has been standing in as the mother without the adoption is to be considered the parent.
Okay, so even in cases where if there's a biological mother and a non-biological mother in the relationship, and they did not adopt the child, they would still get parental
right, as long as they were married at the time of delivery.
Okay. What about the case of step parents? Maybe this is a whole nother thing, but since we're talking about kids, so say my partner and I got married, we both bring kids into the relationship. We're married for 10 years while the kids are in school and still growing up and still in the house when we get divorced. Would that mean that is there a potential for parental rights on either side, or is that going to depend on if there's other parents or other, there's lots of things, right?
So in your hypothetical, is there an active father in the situation?
There is an active father, so that would make a difference, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
so
yeah.
the courts, in considering this, first of all, nobody has a right to former stepkids, to custody or visitation of former stepkids, and no one has a right to support them unless that's an agreement that you made in like a prenup or something like that. Or during, a postnup, I guess, or even the divorce, you could, but it's not going to be in there. So, the bonus kids are, if the relationship between the moms is soured, unfortunately, there's a strong chance you're going to lose that relationship with those bonus kids.
Okay, so in that case, there isn't a built-in system, but there is. Yeah, but there is if they're either the child is adopted by both parents or only one is a biological parent and the baby is born during or adopted during the time of the marriage.
Well, or you could be in an adoption, you could be adopted at any time.
Okay, so they could.
That creates the legal obligations there.
Okay.
But, in the case of the presumed paternity, that's the term that they use. They haven't adjusted the paternity presumption to, because that's an old term that's been around for thousands of years. But there isn't, so there you'll have the presumed paternity or the presumed parenthood, I guess would be a better way to state it. If it's within the relationship, a marriage relationship. And you could still make an argument in court to say if the relationship existed before marriage, because a lot of queer marriages started before marriage was legal and have then evolved into, got married since the Supreme Court in Obergefell. But you're not going to have that automatic presumption. So if you do have to go to court, you can make arguments for it, but it's not going to be automatic, and it's going to be an uphill battle.
Okay, but there are some safeguards in there now for the system. That's good for at least people who have gotten definitely married in the last 10 years and adopted or had kids during that time.
Right. Or were married legally when, because different states it's been
some
legal,
states had it. Yeah.
Legal. I mean, you had Vermont and Hawaii and California for a time before Prop 8, and then after so on. So, it's complicated. But at its root, divorce and marriage is more about the transfer and distribution of property than it is about
Mm-hmm.
relationships and religion and that sort of thing. The religious uh, uh, side of marriage always existed, but it wasn't codified into law until really the Middle Ages in Europe.
Okay, so the stuff you work on as an attorney or as a mediator is specifically about how you're sharing custody of the kids, how you're dividing property, how you're dividing finances and debts. Correct?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Am I missing any big categories there?
The three big things is debts, assets, kids.
Okay.
And you can agree to any, the great thing about mediation is that you can come to agreements about anything. You can share a boat, you can share houses, you can share pets.
Mm-hmm.
And a great thing about mediation, as long as they're legal and conscionable, the judge is going to rubber stamp them. And so even if you have a contentious divorce, if you could work it out through mediation, you're going to get better or the same agreement you'll get from the judge in most cases. Now, in cases of abuse or I don't know, drugs, or where it's not so safe for the kids, I would still say try mediation first, and let mediation. I mean, I'm saying that as a mediator,
Sure.
but you know, what do you have to lose going to court? And if that's where you're going to end up anyways, you might as well try to make it faster and cheaper and your agreement before you let the courts decide for you.
Sure. So in the case of, say, one of those scenarios, so say one of the spouses is maybe medically not fit to be a parent, I'm talking about having kids here, or maybe even making decisions about property or finances. You thought maybe those two scenarios are different, but is it possible to start with mediation and work with the parent who's hoping to have more custody of the kids, but the other parent still has to agree to it, right?
Right,
In the
exactly.
mediation case? Okay.
I mediated a case recently, and it was a case where a mom realized that she was gay, and along the way, and very amicable, no contention between the two. But we shifted it from, it started out with like the 70% mom's custody, 30% dad's. But by the end of it, realized that, maybe mom was a better, or dad was a better fit for the kids to live with full time. And then, so we negotiated, dad's got 100% custody, but mom's got 100% access to the kids. And so mom and kids are coming over. We decided this before dad goes into a new relationship. So anytime, if dad starts dating again, or when dad starts dating again, all future wives have to accept that lesbian mom can come over anytime she wants.
Right.
And so that's a
Mhm.
stipulation in their divorce agreement, that she only has to give like half an hour's notice, I think is what we gave them. And so, for her health and her lifestyle, that fit, that's that's an unusual case. That's the only one I've done like that recently, but that's a great thing about mediation. As long as it's legal, you can agree to anything.
Sure. What about cases where, so is there an opportunity to use mediation if, say, um, you're looking at, if you don't have kids, but there's financial issues? I guess no matter what, I'm thinking out loud here and talking out loud at the same time, that if one doesn't agree, then you're going to have to go to trial, right? So no matter what, but is there a case where you could go into mediation if, say, one of the spouses was in a mental hospital or institutionalized or something like that, or would you have to go to trial in that case?
So when somebody's institutionalized, they can't make decisions for themselves, and so they
Right.
can't
Okay.
enter into a mediation agreement.
Mm-hmm.
And so in a case where you have somebody, they would have to have a representative, either by their estate or from the court. The court will assign somebody to handle that. Yeah, but you're not. It's not like it used to be. You're not forced to stay in that marriage forever because somebody is institutionalized. You can still get a divorce, and in those cases, either temporarily or permanently, you're going to get full custody and you'll get the benefit. But there needs to be somebody, that person will be assigned somebody to make sure they get a fair shake in this, because they're still going to need
Mhm.
financial support. If they took care of the kids for 15 years, they're still going to be entitled to alimony or spousal support, depending on the state. They have different names, but they wouldn't necessarily deserve child support because they're not supporting the kids. Somebody else is supporting them. But and they're still entitled to 50% of the community property or the marital property.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense to me. They're obviously everybody has to have a fair say no matter what space they're in. I just was wondering which system they could use, so that cleared that up for me. Thank you. Um, I think one of the things that's been on my mind a little bit, and I think actually has popped up in some of the groups I'm in, like late bloomer lesbians group, and people who have come out after they're got divorced from a heterosexual marriage, something you have familiarity with. Is there, and we talked about there's some cases where it could potentially be of a negative to them, but overall, is it right that most states, most judges are not going to give that an issue, or when could you see it come up as an issue, or in what types of things should people keep in mind if they're going through that scenario?
So in the 18 states that have no fault divorce, it shouldn't be an issue at all. Your sexuality should never come up. If it does come up, the judges are going to go, that's not an issue. We have no fault divorce. What we need to make sure is the best interest of the kids and the fair equal distribution of the property, and support. So where it's going to affect you most is going to be in custody. If it is an issue, if you're in a state that has an at-fault divorce and you have an adversarial partner, so you're going to have those two things together, because the adversarial, the judge can only give you what somebody asks for, right? And so the other party would have to say, hey, this late blooming lesbian, it's her fault we're getting divorced, so she's not entitled to alimony. And a more conservative judge might agree with you. And in most states, there's no laws; they just have standards when it comes to alimony or spousal support.
Okay.
And custody, you start with the basis of 50-50 and then kind of work backwards from there, looking at the parent schedules, who has been the traditional caretaker of the children, and so on. And so, and there are going to be separate issues, and the judge is going to deal with each issue separately, or at least they're supposed to. So with the alimony, and I think this is probably the biggest danger, is so in most places, if you're married more than 10 or 15 years, that's sort of the standard, you're entitled to alimony for at least the length of the marriage, if not longer. And in most cases, it's going to be around between 30 and 40% of the gross income after child support. So you put it, most states have a statutory child support calculator. You put your information in, it'll spit you out a number. And so let's say child support, for lack of this is $5,000. The more, let's say one partner was making 20,000, so after child support it's 15,000, and mom doesn't make any money. Stay-at-home mom or stay-at-home parent doesn't make any money. And so we're going to say, okay, stay-at-home parent can make minimum wage 40 hours a week. So let's say that's $1,500 a month or whatever it is. We're going to impute some $1,500 a month income. We're going to do this calculation, and between 30 and 40%, based on all the factors, we're going to say mom gets to take home $8,000 a month for 15 years. But a judge has discretion. A judge could say, $12,000 a month is more fair, or, well, because it's her fault, maybe she only gets $1,000 a month for 5 years.
Okay.
Because there's no law, the judge can throw their discretion in there. Where in a mediation situation, we're just going to go off of the base calculator, or in most cases, we're going to say this is what it is, and then let the parents negotiate up or down.
Okay. So there could be
negotiation.
Yeah, right. And I'm guessing if there's a mediator, I guess you could still have somebody who is adversarial and become,
for sure.
Come to a discussion on that. So that could be a good option for somebody who maybe is in a county, in a state where they know the judge it's a fault divorce, and potentially the adversary, that they could use mediation as a potential buffer.
I think mediation might be a way around conservative judges, although you don't think that way in a divorce, right? You'd have to be pretty Machiavellian to plan this all out. And you don't get to choose your judges, you get assigned judges for partly for this reason. And I would say probably 90% of judges in the country are just going to go off of the fairness sort of standard that's in place.
Mm-hmm.
But with the rise of the sort of uh, the political environment that we're in, I don't want to name any names,
Yeah.
right? But we see, where we see trans people being attacked uh, every single day. We're seeing drag shows shut down and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
The big argument against gay marriage is that it's destroying families, which is ridiculous because gay people tend to stay married longer and more often
Yeah.
than straight people do.
Mm-hmm.
But you get one of these judges who's got an axe to grind, and while we haven't seen it yet, it's certainly a possibility. I mean, we're seeing the opposite in most cases, because
Mm-hmm.
most judges try to leave their personal values behind and
Mm-hmm.
judge according to the law. That's what they're there for. But just in Texas, you had a case where it looked like it was going to go the other direction, but in the end, the judge said that assigned alimony to a lesbian mom who didn't adopt the kids. And wasn't on the birth certificate. So, her former partner was the biological mother of this kid. I never found out where the kid came from. It wasn't in any of the articles I read about, but the judge sort of on the end, flipped the point of view and said, no, she has to pay alimony because she's acting as the dad in this relationship. Unfortunately, you have to see it through the filter of the dad. We're not to where we can ungender marriage yet, but I think we're going to get there.
Right. Ooh, that's a lot. I'm processing a little bit. I think so. If I'm thinking about what you're saying right now, there's not always a way to know necessarily what, I mean, there is that you can look at all the judges' records, right? So, but you don't know which judge you have until you get
Yeah.
into the last stage of divorce, right? So if you decided to use attorneys, you might not know who your judge is until you've already paid all the money and gotten through that
Right. You
process,
don't know.
right?
You don't get
Right.
a pick your judge.
Yeah.
And you get assigned your judge the day you file. And they just have first come, first serve. And so, case one goes to Judge A, case two goes to Judge B, and so on. And I don't want to come out and say judges are bad or whatever, but
Right.
they
No.
have a lot of power in family
Mm-hmm.
law. Family law is less regulated by Congress than it probably should be, and I mean, it would not be federal Congress, it would be the state legislatures. State legislatures are also where politics is most adversarial.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the people who run for state senate tend to be the rightist and the leftist of the people.
Right. Right.
And so, maybe that's not an issue that they want to tackle, or maybe it's an issue where they can't find enough common ground to be able to settle. And if it doesn't involve them or enough constituents, it's not that big of an issue. But if I was a law professor and I was teaching a queer family law case, I would encourage, I would write an article asking state legislatures to make it, to codify the fairness and remove the genders out of family law, because it's
Mm-hmm.
still very, in most areas it doesn't matter, but in family law there's still a lot of gender that it's based on man and woman.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's going to go away soon enough, especially with the way politics is right now, but I think eventually it will.
Yes, please. Let's head in that direction.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think we are. So I think I'm going to try to recap some of the main highlights of what you're sharing. So in 2017, there was the court case that you mentioned that made it so that all of the gendered rules around divorce also were the same for queer marriage. So in most states where, that's okay. So in all will go
Well,
fine.
so no fault divorce exists only in a minority. So no fault
Okay.
divorce exists in all 50 states plus the DC.
Okay.
However, there's only 18 or 19 states where no fault divorce is the only divorce option.
Oh,
So
okay.
that leaves 30 plus states, plus the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico and Guam and
Mm-hmm.
all these places where you can still have an at fault divorce.
Okay.
The case was Pavan or Pavan,
Mm-hmm.
Pavan. Sorry.
You can send
uh,
me the name. I'll put it in the show
yeah.
notes. Yeah.
So while course will teach property distribution when
Mm-hmm.
it comes as equal, they're supposed to create that as equal. And you have Pavan saying parenthood is now assumed in certain cases.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
That is the Supreme Court. And you have at least 2 layers of court before you get to Supreme Court. Now, the lower courts are supposed to follow the Supreme Court.
Okay.
And in Tennessee, you just had that. You had a district judge saying, no, drag shows are part of free speech. So yes,
Mm-hmm.
we saw a judge doing his job. But how many judges have we seen agree with? I mean, Roe v. Wade was overturned.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I had to go through district court in the states,
Mm-hmm.
appellate court in the federal circuits, and then get up to the Supreme Court. So there's the damage. The Supreme Court doesn't see individuals, they see concepts. And it's
Mm-hmm.
individuals who are paying alimony and have custody. And it's
Right.
little kids who are being taken away from parents they might have known for several years,
Mm-hmm.
their whole lives in some cases. So
Yeah.
that's the potentiality for problems. And mediation, I'm not saying mediation solves all the problems,
Right. Right.
right? Because mediation can fail.
Mm-hmm.
Mediation, a lot of times mediation is balancing on a razor's edge.
Yeah.
But if you can get through mediation, you're more likely to get that rubber stamp, get it over with faster, and
Mm-hmm.
get your agreement, what you and your ex decided to do, not what third party political activist judge might have done.
Right. You'll have more control over this scenario.
99.999% of your viewers aren't going to deal with that.
Right. Yes. Yes. I know that. We want to
Yeah.
make sure that,
But
that
that
they're,
0.001%,
mm-hmm.
and who knows how big of an issue this is going to be. If the right gets more anti-LGBT, more homophobic, more everything,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be a bigger problem. Thankfully, I think that these guys are on their final death knells, and the former generation's going away, and they just want to get everything they can to keep it their way as long as possible, and they're going away soon.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Hopefully we don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it does sound like you were saying, for 99.9% of the people who are listening, the process in most states, except for there's a few potential judges around in these states where there could potentially be fault cases and an adversarial spouse, that there could be struggles. In all of the other cases, the process is relatively equal between heterosexual marriage and homosexual marriage, or if somebody is also coming out after their marriage.
And can I add one more thing that's kind of off
Sure.
topic,
Yeah.
but still related?
Sure. Go for it.
I think, what I've seen is that people need to forgive themselves a little bit more, and give space. That's one of the reasons I love mediation, because it gives space. No decisions in mediation are ever final until you submit the paperwork to the judge.
Mm-hmm.
So you can go back and change anything if you have to. So if there's a late blooming lesbian, like you said, or
Mm-hmm.
a gay man who comes out who was in a heteronormative straight marriage, then that there's a lot of trauma in that. For me, it was, it kind of clicked, like when she's a Paul, and I kind of guessed it. I'm like, she's saying, we were going through some stuff, and are you gay? And I almost said it as a joke, when she's like,
Yeah.
say that. And but it, I joined a bunch of what are they called? Like groups and stuff like that who dealt with this sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't find the anger. For me, it made a lot of sense. Like, oh yeah, well, that explains a lot of the last
Mm-hmm.
13 years of my life. But some people, there's some real anger and hurt. I mean, and anger is always a secondary emotion,
Yeah.
always coming from fear or hurt or something like that. And so both parties, one party's having a new awakening in their life. They're a brand new little baby. They
Mm-hmm.
oh, wait, I'm gay. I get to do all these new things in my life. I get to be myself for the first time. The other guy's going, or the other person is going, oh man, I expected all this to happen for the next 50 years of my life. I expect to have you as
Mm-hmm.
a partner. I loved you so much. And now you want to get divorced, all these different things. And and during that process, you're going to say and do things that might hurt each other's feelings. But in the end, especially if you have kids, you're going to have to be in a relationship forever.
You're right. Right.
And so, the thing about love about mediation, and this is why I went into it, is because you get that space to love each other through the hurt and the pain.
Mm-hmm.
And, you can decide, you get to decide, you're like, yeah, I can't live with you anymore, but I can still love you. And if you can get to that point, aside from all the Supreme Court crap and all
Mm-hmm.
this kind of world
Yeah.
politics that are going on, you're still raising kids together.
Right.
And you know, put their needs for kids need loving parents. And it doesn't matter if the parents are two women, a man and a woman. In my case, we got two women, a man, and then another man because Sal was married before too. And we
Yeah.
all interact with each other's kids.
Mm-hmm.
And while I don't parent I call her my ex-wife-in-law.
Yeah.
I call someone, well, I don't parent my ex-wife-in-law's kids. I'm still there at every birthday. We're going to choir performances. We're
Mm-hmm.
doing that sort of stuff. Taking them to the beach together, or when they, sometimes we trade out kids, and you're still a huge influence. And if you're showing those kids the right way to live, which I think examples as a parent is the best way to teach your children, you're
Mm-hmm.
showing them that their needs are more important, that love is better than hate or anger or anything like that. If you can get through that, and I think mediation is the process of doing that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
mediators are kind of split between attorneys and um, mental health professionals. And so
Right.
you sort of had two different avenues to go for mediation. And I think that's wonderful. So whatever you need, as you're shopping for mediators, do you need, you know, do you need the stricter legal side of things? Do you need somebody who is trained in dialogue and negotiation? Do you need somebody who is a therapist in their other job? That I think, yes, all of the above, please.
Yeah, you made that sound so beautiful. How did you make divorce and mediation sound so beautiful? Like you can
But
that's amazing.
I'm one of those guys who just loves love, and I love
Yeah.
my kids.
Yeah.
I'm a child of a very contentious divorce. I never had a relationship with my mother, ever.
Yeah.
My parents were divorced when I was really young. And if I could change anything about my personal history, it would be to have a relationship with my mom and to have
Mm-hmm.
grown up. I had a couple of different stepmoms, and one of them was super impactful in my life in a positive way. One was impactful in my life in a negative way.
Mm-hmm.
And my ex-wife, Lena, she's also the child of divorce, same situation, bad divorce, very contentious. And so we decided from the very beginning, we would always put the kids first. And those "What Would Jesus Do" bracelets that kids wore in the 90s?
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
we basically decided what wouldn't our parents do would be our
Mm-hmm.
mantra through our mediation process and divorce process. So if our parents would fight, we would come together.
Mm-hmm.
First year, we decided that at least once a week, we would do something all six of us together. We have four kids. So
Mm-hmm.
we do something all six of us together. And we forced that. Now we do something, not, we don't even plan it. If they're having a party, I'm invited. If I'm doing a thing, like for example, I was nervous about talking on YouTube in a podcast. So I
Yeah.
told my ex-wife, I go, give me a pep talk. She's still my best friend. And I think that's because, the marriage dissolved, not because it fell apart, but because she's gay. And
Yeah.
I was able, oh yeah, she's totally gay. But because she was gay, we didn't necessarily have the traditional, intimate marriage situation that straight couples might have. It was pretty platonic in a lot of cases. So we became best friends, and we became really good at working through things because we had a lot of issues to work through. Right? There's a lot of options.
Yeah.
Someone's not straight and someone's straight, and you're married. You got a lot of challenges in that relationship that you have to overcome. And then if you can spend, a decade and a half overcoming them, you get pretty good at solving problems. And so, that's kind of where I think, I ended up. That's why I love mediation. That's why I started this. You can see this is my living room here. I've got a pride flag up. So my boys know that I support their mom, and she makes sure on Father's Day to get all the cards, the boys to make cards and stuff like. We support each other. And what we're really doing, yes, it's nice for me and her, but what our kids are seeing is that their parents still love each other, and then there's a way through anger. And divorce is expensive. Mediated divorce is a lot less expensive. But it's still expensive. You're still supporting two households. You have alimony, you have child support, you have all these different things. On top of that, you have to clean out half your retirement, half your savings, all these things. You have to split assets. And so, there's room for a lot of anger, but if you can just focus on the peace side of it, if you do divorce right, everybody's happier at the end of it. The kids are better off. It's much better to see kids seeing parents live their true selves and in good relationships than in bad relationships. It teaches them boundaries. It teaches them to be strong and to stand up for themselves. It teaches them that there's different things in relationships, different types of relationships. If you do mediation and divorce right, you're happier. You're not in a bad marriage anymore. You're not fighting anymore. You got to learn to let go of those things and realize that everything is different now.
Cool, that's so good.
Sorry.
No, it's so good.
I'm sitting here just
thinking, no, you did not. I'm just thinking about how I think about the process for divorce. And for me, I'm a year out of the legal divorce and 2 years separated from my ex-husband. So I'm in a similar process that you went through. My ex-husband would be you, and I'm with a new partner, and we're raising our kids together and trying to get the dads in there. So I think what you're saying about the going through the divorce process makes such a difference when it comes to our relationship. And my ex-husband and I didn't start out doing it really well, but we turned it around and were able to have some good discussions with attorneys. And then, that really does help as you're thinking about it moving forward, like thinking about the boundaries you can set together and loving each other through it, even though you might hate each other some of the times, like what's the,
I don't agree with everything my ex says, but in front of my kids, I'm going to support everything she says.
Right.
Because the last thing I want them to do is to start questioning their mom. I mean, that's their mom, and I can see it. I'm super important in my boys' lives, but moms are the most important part in any child's life, at least for the first half. The first 10, 15 years. So, it's so important for parents to support each other. And if I could give any advice, it would be set the intention, and I know that's sort of a woo-woo, or my ex teaches Kundalini yoga. And so this is probably rubbed off on me. It was all about intentional and breath work and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So important in relationships too. If you set that intention, and then you go, well, my values are whatever your values are, my case is like love, support, understanding, that sort of stuff. And so if I go, my intention is to build love in relationships, teach my kids how to have these things, so on and so forth. Then I can check my behavior. Is my behavior in line with my boundaries or in line with my values? And if it's not, I can go back. And the great thing about being humans is that we can always ask for forgiveness. Nothing's
right.
We can ask for forgiveness, we can change, and we can forget people. So, while where maybe you didn't start out on the right foot, you can be on the right foot today and tomorrow and the rest of your life. And so can your ex, and you can start inviting each other. I mean, I think to me, that was the most important thing my ex did, was she invited me to everything.
Yeah.
And at first I was too hurt to accept all the invitations. Plus I'm super introverted, so it's like hard to get me out of the house sometimes. But as she kept inviting me, I would go to the important things. I realized it was fun. And the more thing, now I'm a fixture. You
Yeah, yeah.
know,
Hmm.
I'm part, they have their family, I have my family at my house, they have their family at their house, but we also have this big family together that consists of 4 parents and 7 kids.
Hmm.
And while we don't do everything that we do together, we discuss almost everything together. We plan everything, if we're changing the kid's school, health decisions, blah, 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 all the stuff that you need to do in divorce, because that's all outlined in our divorce agreement.
Yeah.
We can't change school districts without 100% approval across the board, right? So, you know, you got to have those discussions, you got to have those agreements. So one parent could hold hostage, but then that's sabotaging the relationship. Put the
Right.
relationships first. Let your mediator or attorney deal with the legal stuff. You put your relationships first.
That's such good advice. And I think we're going to end on that awesome advice. I thank you so much for walking us through the mediation process and some of these legalities around divorce, and your super good advice on relationships and how to end a marriage in a good way. I could see how clients would find you as an amazing mediator in the
Well,
process.
thanks,
That's
Tara.
awesome. Thank you.
Well, I
Uh,
appreciate it. And I think what you're doing is important because, queer divorce is pretty new. It's
mhm.
a new area, and there's a lot of people, both straight people and queer people, who are trying to figure out and navigate these relationships. So thanks for taking the time out and doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And for those of you who want to follow up and see more of Paul's stuff, I'll put it out in the show notes on the website. But you can find him on Instagram at New Way Mediation, and also on his website at newwaymediation.com. Thank you so much again.
Thanks, Tara. Have a great day.
Hey, 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 the sun's shining today. I gotta get it bango before it goes away. Hey, 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 the sun's shining today. I gotta get it bango before it goes away. Hey.